We will not give up. We will not surrender. We will fight for our freedom.
The 5th of September, 2025, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The press hall is packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras humming, microphones lined up like soldiers. Over 120 journalists from 15 countries have gathered, their feeds going live to more than 5 million viewers worldwide. The rumor that brought them here is as sharp as it is unsettling. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu allegedly sent a warning to African leaders: fall in line or face the consequences. For many, it was politics as usual. For President Ibrahim Traoré, it was a line that could not be crossed. He walks to the podium without prepared notes, his military jacket catching the midday light, eyes steady on the crowd. What comes next is not a diplomatic reply behind closed doors, but a direct, televised answer to the world. We are no longer colonies. Burkina Faso does not answer to Tel Aviv, Washington, or any power that thinks it can buy or intimidate us. The words hang in the air, not just aimed at Israel, but at the global system that extracts hundreds of billions in African resources, while most of the continent lives on less than $2 a day. What was his final warning to Netanyahu, and why did it send ripples far beyond the UN floor? Follow, subscribe, and share, because the next words might change more than headlines. The 5th of September, 2025, New York City, United Nations General Assembly Hall. The air inside is thick with formality, the kind that usually keeps speeches safe, polite, and predictable. But this time, there's an edge. President Ibrahim Traoré steps up to the podium, pauses for only a second, and then delivers the line that will ignite a continent. If you come for one of us, you come for all of us. The sentence lands like a drumbeat in the marble chamber, cutting across translation headsets and national agendas. In that moment, the subtext is unmistakable. This is not just a warning to Prime Minister Netanyahu, it is a statement of collective African defense, political, economic, and moral. For decades, African nations have faced threats in isolation, divided by borders, and weakened by external influence. Today, the declaration suggests a different map, one where an attack on Ouagadougou is answered in Bamako, Conakry, or Johannesburg. Within 3 hours, the hashtag number Africa will not bow surges past 1.2 million uses on X, TikTok, and Facebook. The speech clip spreads through encrypted WhatsApp groups in Mali and Guinea, plays on battery-powered radios in rural markets, and echoes from loudspeakers in South African university courtyards. In crowded bus stations from Accra to Maputo, strangers lean over shared smartphone screens to watch the 30-second clip again and again. In Bamako, Mali's interim president posts a public message of support, calling Traoré's words a necessary reminder that Africa's dignity is not negotiable. Guinea's leadership follows, promising joint action if any member of their regional alliance is targeted. Even community broadcasters in remote areas splice the quote into morning news bulletins, so that farmers, traders, and schoolchildren all hear the same phrase before the day begins. Reactions abroad are split. Some Western commentators call the tone reckless, warning it could escalate tensions. But within Pan-African networks, the tone is celebrated as overdue, a voice cutting through the cautious diplomacy that has too often muted African grievances. For activists and scholars, the significance lies not only in the message, but in the setting, a challenge issued from the world's most formal stage, where Africa is often spoken about, not spoken for. Then comes the silence. Tel Aviv offers no public comment. Washington's response is carefully measured, acknowledging the right of all nations to sovereignty, without addressing the substance of Traoré's warning. In Ouagadougou and beyond, that absence of confrontation is read as a symbolic victory, proof that standing firm can sometimes force even the most powerful to pause. At home, the atmosphere shifts. Street vendors replay the clip on portable screens. Young people paint the words on murals and t-shirts. In the Sahel, where news often arrives late and filtered, this message spreads unedited and unsoftened. Burkina Faso's name becomes shorthand for defiance with dignity. But one question remains in the air. Was this the start of a lasting continental front, or just a rare flash of unity? The answer, many believe, will depend on whether those words stay in headlines, or take root in policy, trade, and defense. The 6th of September, 2025 Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Dawn breaks over Revolution Square, but the square is already full. Without a government call, more than 15,000 people have gathered, farmers, students, traders, veterans, singing the national anthem and waving flags under a rising Sunday. Some carry cardboard signs with Traoré's UN quote painted in bold red, "If you come for one of us, you come for all of us." The air feels less like a protest and more like a declaration of ownership of the country, of its future. Inside the presidential offices, aides count over 3,000 letters and digital messages of support sent overnight. It's not just domestic. In Bamako, Mali's National Assembly passes a resolution backing Traoré's stance and urging closer military coordination. Niger's parliament follows within hours. By afternoon, defense officials confirm plans for a joint military exercise of 4,000 troops, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, set for March 2025, a visible rehearsal of the collective defense Traoré spoke of at the UN. The political ripple spreads into economic waters. In Ouagadougou's cafes and radio talk shows, the conversation shifts from diplomacy to sovereignty, not just of borders, but of resources. Call-in programs debate whether foreign mining contracts, signed under previous governments, should be reviewed or revoked. The Ministry of Energy moves quickly, announcing it is renegotiating at least 5 major contracts in gold and uranium, aiming to secure higher state shares and stronger labor protections. For many, this is the first sign that the UN speech was more than words, that it could reshape policy in ways that touch everyday lives. Markets respond cautiously. Foreign investors watch for signals, while local cooperatives express optimism that resource revenues could finally fund schools, hospitals, and infrastructure instead of flowing abroad. In rural provinces, the speech becomes a teaching moment. Community leaders explain to young people how sovereignty is not only defended by armies, but also by economic terms written into contracts. But with every shift comes the question, can Burkina Faso transform this surge of unity and pride into lasting structural change? Or will the momentum fade under the weight of old pressures and familiar temptations? The answer may depend on whether the voices in Revolution Square keep singing not just in the glow of a speech, but in the long, slow work of rewriting the rules at home. The 8th of September, 2025 Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Just 3 days after Traoré's speech at the UN, the National Assembly convenes in an emergency session. The chamber is tense, but focused. On the table is the Sovereignty Act, a sweeping piece of legislation designed to translate words into enforceable law. The draft proposes 3 bold measures: restrict all foreign military bases on Burkinabe soil, tighten controls on raw resource exports, and prioritize domestic companies for strategic sectors, from mining to telecommunications. It is, in effect, a legal firewall against the slow erosion of independence. The data is clear. A national poll conducted on the 7th of September shows 78% public support for the bill. In marketplaces and taxi ranks, people speak about it, not as abstract policy, but as protection from losing land to speculative leases, from watching gold leave the country unprocessed, from becoming dependent on foreign troops for security. Yet the pushback is already in motion. Western diplomats, without naming the bill directly, warn that such moves could affect aid flows and security cooperation. Traoré's government seems unfazed. The Ministry of Finance releases a counter-strategy, replacing vulnerable aid streams with financing from African development banks, private Asian investors, and sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East. The goal is simple but radical: ensure no single foreign donor holds the power to shut down essential programs. Beyond Burkina Faso, the Sahel Alliance responds with its own shift. Mali and Niger commit to harmonizing export regulations and announce a joint renewable energy initiative, a solar power network capable of supplying 1.5 million households by 2030, financed without reliance on Western loans. For them, the Sovereignty Act is not just Burkina Faso's law, it is a regional precedent. The international response is mixed, almost theatrical in its contrasts. In Washington, State Department officials issue carefully measured statements about regional stability, while privately voicing concern that other African leaders might copy the model. In Tel Aviv, officials remain silent, but leaked internal briefings suggest close monitoring of Ouagadougou's moves. Moscow and Beijing see opportunity, dispatching trade envoys within days. Europe is split. Some governments quietly criticize the direction, while grassroots organizations and Pan-African networks in Paris, Brussels, and Berlin hail Traoré's defiance as overdue. Inside Burkina Faso, the atmosphere is charged equal parts determination and vigilance. Parliamentarians debate the fine print late into the night, aware that a law this ambitious will be tested immediately by market pressures and diplomatic maneuvering. Civil society groups organize public forums to explain the bill in plain language, framing it as the foundation of economic justice. The question now is not whether the Sovereignty Act will pass. Momentum makes that almost certain, but whether it will hold under the weight of international pushback. Will Burkina Faso's new legal shield inspire others to follow? Or will it become the lightning rod that draws every kind of pressure imaginable? As the debates rage and the votes near, one thing is clear. The speech at the UN was not the end of a moment, it was the start of a structural shift, one that could redefine the balance between Africa and the world. The 9th of September, 2025 Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The image that had traveled across Africa for weeks still dominates the front pages. President Ibrahim Traoré, standing at the UN podium, delivering his final warning. Power is not size, power is courage. A line aimed squarely at Prime Minister Netanyahu, but resonating far beyond that diplomatic clash. It is printed on T-shirts in Dakar, painted on walls in Lagos, quoted in school assemblies in Bamako. On social media, the hashtag number #WeStandWithTraoré has crossed 40 million views, amplified by musicians, poets, and activists who see in those words not just defiance, but a permission slip for self-respect. Children in remote villages recite his lines for community radio. Artists in Accra remix the speech into songs and street murals. The Ouagadougou effect is no longer just a trending topic, it is a cultural and political wave. But under that wave, something deeper is moving. On the morning of reporters in Bamako and Niamey begin to whisper about a closed-door meeting held in Ouagadougou between the defense ministers of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The meeting is notable not only for the three Sahel states but for the presence of observers from Guinea and Chad. Hours later, leaked notes surface. Discussions about a West African sovereignty pact, a proposed alliance that would make Traoré's UN rhetoric enforceable. The draft is ambitious. First, a mutual defense clause, an attack on one member is an attack on all, echoing Traoré's UN warning, but now grounded in formal treaty language. Second, joint infrastructure projects, rail, energy, and communications built with pooled resources, bypassing Western financial dependency. Third, a rule requiring unanimous member approval before any foreign military base can be established in a member state, effectively ending the era of isolated deals with outside powers. In the weeks that follow, quiet diplomacy turns into open coordination. The 9th of September, 2025 Bamako, Mali. The announcement is made in full daylight. The West African Sovereignty Pact is official. Leaders from the founding members stand on a single stage, their national flags behind them, signing the accord before a crowd of thousands. The commitments are stark. Reject all new foreign military bases, suspend foreign aid deemed dependency-forming, and launch a $1.2 billion West African Infrastructure Fund, financed entirely without Western loans, using a mix of domestic revenues, regional development banks, and bilateral deals with non-Western partners. Footage of the signing spreads quickly. In marketplaces from Niamey to Conakry, shopkeepers keep small radios tuned to the coverage. Truck drivers along the Bamako-Ouagadougou highway honk their horns in celebration. Farmers in Mali call in to local radio programs, saying this is the first time in their lives they've seen leaders act like brothers instead of competitors. Internationally, reactions split along familiar lines. Pan-African networks hail the pact as the beginning of a regional shield against exploitation. Western policymakers, speaking cautiously, express concerns about regional stability, a phrase many in the Sahel interpret as coded unease over losing influence. Russia and China move quickly, dispatching trade and security envoys within days. In Europe, the political elite are divided. Some warn against geopolitical drift, while grassroots solidarity groups celebrate the alliance as proof that Africa can chart its own course. For Traoré, the signing marks a rare moment when the distance between rhetoric and reality shrinks. His UN statement, once dismissed by some as theater, is now institutionalized into a binding regional agreement. The symbolism is as important as the text. The image of Sahel leaders side by side, refusing to be played off against each other, sends a message that no speech alone could carry. Yet inside the capitals of the new alliance, no one is naive. Every clause in the Sovereignty Pact will be tested by market pressures, by diplomatic overtures, by covert attempts to peel members away. Infrastructure funds will face the grind of procurement, oversight, and the long shadow of corruption. Defense cooperation will need to withstand not just hypothetical threats, but the hard logistics of joint operations. And still, the Ouagadougou effect holds. It lives in the way schoolchildren in Zinda can now name the leaders of 3 neighboring countries and speak about them as allies, not strangers. It lives in the fact that for the first time in decades, regional news leads with projects being built together, rather than crises tearing states apart. As night falls over Bamako, fireworks crackle over the Niger River, reflected in the water like scattered embers. Somewhere in Ouagadougou, in the quiet after the day's speeches, an aide asks Traoré if he thinks the pact will survive the storms ahead. He answers with the same tone. The 10th of September, 20252, 00 PM Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The morning sun spills across Revolution Square, the same ground where, a year ago, thousands gathered to hear their president return from the United Nations with a message that defied convention and rewrote the tone of African diplomacy. The air today is different, not charged with the anticipation of a single speech, but with the weight of a year's worth of results. Banners ripple above the crowd, not with slogans, but with numbers. GDP growth 5.6%, 27% more gold revenue retained, 250,000 new homes with electricity. These are not projections or promises. They are audited facts, confirmed by the Ministry of Finance, and discussed openly on the country's nightly news. It began with the Ouagadougou effect, the moment Traoré told the UN and the watching world, "If you come for one of us, you come for all of us." Many dismissed it as symbolic theater, a soundbite for Pan-African pride. But over the past 12 months, the line hardened into policy, and policy into measurable change. GDP growth has climbed from 3.8% to 5.6%, the fastest pace in a decade. By renegotiating key mining contracts, Burkina Faso has increased its share of export gold revenue from 42% to 69%, money redirected into rural electrification and agriculture subsidies. The social ripple is visible. School enrollment at the primary level has jumped 15%, driven not by foreign aid campaigns but by domestic investment in teachers and infrastructure. In the countryside, 250,000 households, many of them in provinces that had never seen a light bulb glow after sunset, are now connected to solar-powered microgrids. Farmers report a 22% increase in local agricultural output, partly from irrigation projects funded by the redirected mining revenues, partly from new regional trade channels born out of the West African Sovereignty Pact. By mid-morning, the square is full. University students, market vendors, and elders from rural cooperatives stand side by side. A giant screen replays clips from last year's UN speech, but now the footage feels less like a provocation and more like a foundation stone. Then, at 10:15 a.m., Traoré takes the stage. He waits for the applause to settle, then speaks into the microphone without looking at his notes. "We did not ask for permission to be free. We stood up and took it. Freedom is not granted by those who benefit from your submission. It is built, defended, and proven by what you do with it." His voice is calm, but each word carries the weight of the past year's shifts, the laws passed, the contracts rewritten, the alliances forged. He reminds the crowd that sovereignty is not an end state, but an ongoing practice. Independence without strategy, he warns, is just a change of flag. Real sovereignty feeds our people, lights our homes, and keeps our dignity intact in every deal we sign. Across the continent, the anniversary is being marked in different ways. In Mali and Niger, radio stations broadcast live coverage of the speech. In Ghana and Senegal, university student unions host debates about whether their own governments should follow Burkina Faso's path. Online, the hashtag #OneYearStanding trends across African social media, interwoven with images of farmers in irrigated fields, children in newly lit classrooms, and solar panels gleaming in desert towns. But the most striking reaction is the absence of the usual disclaimers from abroad. In Washington and Brussels, officials comment cautiously on Burkina Faso's impressive development indicators, even as they avoid addressing the underlying sovereignty model. Tel Aviv, still silent, is rumored to be quietly reassessing its own approach to African diplomacy. In Beijing and Moscow, trade delegations arrive with proposals, while Pan-African economists discuss how the Burkina model could be scaled beyond the Sahel. The scene in Revolution Square builds toward a close. The crowd chants lines from last year's UN speech, the words now braided with lived experience. The banners don't just say, "We stand," they list achievements: kilometers of road paved, hectares of farmland restored, cooperatives funded. The message is subtle but clear. Pride is not just an emotion, it's a ledger. As the event winds down, Traoré's final words hang in the air like a challenge. 1 year ago, we told the world we would not bow. Today, we show what happens when a nation stands. Imagine what we can do in 10. The camera pans across faces in the crowd: a miner in a dust-stained shirt, a young girl holding a solar-powered lantern, a teacher clutching new textbooks. The applause swells, not in frenzy, but in conviction, the sound of a people recognizing that sovereignty is not a flag on a pole, but a practice in their hands. If you believe this story matters, save this video, share it, and tell us in the comments, in your own community, what would standing up look like, and what would it change?